All right. Good afternoon, folks. It's always interesting being the last speaker of the session or of a conference because a lot of people are leaving. Um, I guess there isn't a session moderator, so I'm just going to wing it from here. But for those of you here, thank you so much for coming. What I really wanted to do, and Susie and I had discussed this before, and it's sad she's not here, but the journal is one of our most visible products, and so I've now been this is my second year as editor, and it's been a lot of fun. But there are some challenges and there's some changes that are coming, and so I wanted to kind of present some of that information and talk about how we might be able to increase the visibility of the journal and just make it more impactful. So I'm assuming okay. Thank you. So at the end of my presentation at the AGM, I actually put up the slide. It's just kind of to bridge between what I said, who should be here, and what broadly we would be talking about. And the main things I want to cover is just a brief overview of the journal, when it started, when things changed, and where we are now, and then some of the journal financial issues, and then how to increase manuscript submission success, especially for some of the younger researchers in the audience. For many of us, that's an important thing, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, being able to successfully publish is important, and sometimes it can be a very frustrating exercise, and sometimes it can be surprisingly smooth. That doesn't happen as often as the more frustrating stuff, but there are some things, I as an editor can pass on to kind of give guidance as to how they can be more successful. Then there's also some publication costs. That's never free or rarely free, but things are changing. And I think that's really beneficial. So I'm going to cover some of that. And then in terms of editorial and reviewer contributions is really fundamentally important for peer review publication. And then I want to open it up for discussion. And I'm hoping that the whole session won't be more than about an hour. I don't want this thing to drag out, but I'd really like some feedback from everybody in the audience about things that could be done potentially, to make the journal even more successful than it's been. So just a brief history. The journal is the Grassland Society's primary journal, and it's also the leading range and pasture journal of the continent. It's dedicated to advancing knowledge about rangeland and pasture ecology and management. And it was founded, the GSSA was founded after an inaugural meeting that was attended by 96 delegates in February of 1996. So we're having the 60th anniversary next year. And I guess that is actually the 60th year. It's not at the end of the 60th year. But my understanding is the first discussions about the society were actually held in 1965. And so that'll make it the 60th anniversary since the idea was launched. So as far as the journal goes, for the first many years, it was a once-a-year publication published as the Proceedings of the Grassland Society of Southern Africa. And it was published after this annual meeting that we've just had. From 1984 to 1992, the Grassland Society continued to publish it as a quarterly journal. But then at that point, it actually went to a 3 times a year publication because it's sometimes challenging to maintain sufficient volume, even for a quarterly journal, because we are a regional journal and not we are an international journal, but I'll talk a little bit about more as a way of maybe increasing volume. I'd love for this to go to 6 issues a year, but at the moment, we just do not have the volume for that. So from 1993 to the present, it's been published as the African Journal of Range and Forage Science. It was initially published 3 times a year until 2015. And then in 2012 is actually when the GSSA contracted NISC, who works together with Taylor and Francis, to take over the publication of the journal. The real advantage of that is that publishing a journal takes a lot of time and effort. And more importantly, though, is when you have it with an organization like Taylor and Francis, is they do global marketing. And so our exposure has gone up dramatically since that change. And that's where we are today. We still publish through NISC, which is has a collaboration with Taylor and Francis. I'm not going to go through the details again that I gave you last time. So one of the things that we did was that the aims and scope had not been updated for quite some time. So I, together with everybody on council and also the editorial advisory panel, we crafted some new language for aims and scope. One of the frustrations for me has been is I get a plethora of papers on things that are not really related to the primary things that we're interested in, which are rangelands and pasture lands. We get a lot of sort of agronomic stuff on silage. And then I remember one time somebody from, it was a paper from India, was on chicken feed. And I said, yeah, we don't publish chicken feed. We publish real stuff. And I wasn't quite as rude as that. But anyway, so we tried to redo the aims and scope to make it more clear what the journal is actually about. And for those of you publishing in it, I really encourage you to read the aims and scope really carefully and really clearly identify how your paper fits into that. Because one of the real challenges I have as an editor is to send it out for review is when it doesn't fit the aims and scope. And then my response normally is to the authors, it's out of scope. And so we're not processing it. So the second kind of thing is we emphasized the journal's dedication to advancing knowledge about rangeland pasture ecology and management through the publication of original, high-quality research of international importance, and that is relevant to the African continent. Now, not everything we publish is directly relevant, but there has to be relevancy for the African continent. So again, most of us here would be working on stuff that is relevant to the African continent, but sometimes some of the overseas authors don't really make that connection, and that also makes it difficult for us to capture. What is important is our work should be relevant beyond just our immediate small regional area. Authors are encouraged to identify practical implications of their research. Not everything has practical application, but certainly that is always makes it more meaningful and people more likely to read it if there are some practical aspects of the research that we're conducting. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you increase the impact of your manuscript in a minute. But in the discussion, that is an aspect that one should really try and address. I'm not going to run through all these topics. When you read the aims and scope, I've summarized them a little bit, but there are essentially 7 or 8 different categories that we kind of emphasized. And that's not exclusive, but it does give people a guideline on what the kind of material that's published in the journal is about. And then really importantly and least easily done is this idea of transdisciplinary linkages among biophysical and social sciences, sort of more integrative papers. Those kind of papers really get a lot of attraction. Increasingly, it's recognized that we have to use multidisciplinary approaches to produce meaningful solutions for real-world problems that relate to rangelands and pasture and the ecosystems upon which we focus. So that's kind of just a quick summary of the aims and scope. And again, I would encourage you to read it carefully. By the way, I did notice that the online aims and scope have not been updated, so I need to get a hold of NIST to get that done. So what do we publish? Well, we publish review papers, research papers, full-length research papers. We also publish research notes. So sometimes if there's a single year of data, and it's more about the methodology than it is about the impactfulness of the results, we will encourage authors, if they haven't already done so, to submit it as a research note, which is a shorter paper of 3,000 words, not more than 3,000 words, can only have 3 tables and or figures, and then to publish in that regard. And sometimes people say, no, I don't want to do that. I want to have a full research paper. From my own personal experience, I've been involved with research notes, and they count just as much as a research paper, and they get cited. So you shouldn't be hesitant if you don't quite have the volume of material to publish as a full research paper, publish it as a research note. We also do book reviews, and certainly if some of you come across a book that you'd like to review, Craig Morrison is our book editor, and he handles all of that very capably. We rarely get letters to the editor. I wish we could get that more often, get a little bit of debate going on contentious stuff. That's good things, and that's also published. One thing I just want to bring to everybody's attention is that recently Taylor and Francis and many other publishers actually have launched this new type of paper, which is a data note. So a data note basically is if you've got a big data set and it's too big to fully present, but you want the data out there for other people to be able to utilize, you can potentially publish that as a paper or submit it as for consideration by the journal. I'm not fully convinced about it because I think sometimes maybe it's people who produce those kind of things that they're just too lazy to try and analyze their own data and they just want to put it out there. However, there are some really important long-term data sets that could be used by a number of people and even for meta-analyses and things like that. So I just want to give you a heads up of that. If you are involved with a long-term data set or a very large data set that you'd like to have in the public domain, this is a way that you can also get it out in a publication and get credit for it. And obviously people get to know better about it then too. This thing doesn't want to work for me now. Did you lock me out? I'm finished. No, it is. Okay, so manuscripts are peer reviewed. Now, how many of you publish peer reviewed journals, articles? Most of you, I assume. Anybody not? And that thinks they may need to. All right. So why do we peer review, right? And some people refuse to be, to be assessed in terms of what their material is. And that's okay. But the whole idea of peer review is that it makes it a frustrating process. No, that's not the idea of it. But sometimes it is a very frustrating process. And sometimes I get really frustrated with some of the reviewer comments I get back. But then when I actually bother to sit down and address them seriously, I inevitably find out that my manuscript is a lot better after a peer review than it was when we first sent it out. And it's the usual story, many minds are better than just one or even a handful of minds. So the peer review process is intended to make sure that your publications are scientifically rigorous and that they're defensible. And that's the whole process. So even though it's a frustrating process, it's a process that we need to endure and that we hopefully will actually see as valuable once our paper is accepted for publication. I'm going to also bring this up because it includes an associate editor. So I, as an editor, get a manuscript. I think about the associate editors who I have in my realm. We have about 24 at the moment. And I think, well, who would be the best person qualified to handle this paper? I send it to them. They send it to reviewers. And this is really important because every paper you submit needs to be reviewed by 2 to 3 people. Some journals have gone to the craziness of sending it to 12 people, and then you get this plethora of peer reviews back. I had a situation like that once with a journal, and I respectfully requested them take me off the reviewer list because they were just wasting my time. But anyway, so just keep that in mind. Authors must comprehensively address each reviewer comment. Sometimes we get, reviewers response, author responses back, and somebody's made a comment, they just say, done. Unacceptable. I just reject this straight off. I just say, tell me how and where. So first of all, it must be explained, how did you address this? And if you disagree, you don't have to accept the comment, but if you disagree with the comment, you have to explain why and why you decided not to change the manuscript according to the recommendation. And that's perfectly fine as long as it's defensible. But just these short comments, I'm just dealing with one right now. They keep sending me back the same iteration of the manuscript and not properly addressing the comments. And I want to accept it, but I can't do it until they actually address it. So I think this is one of the most important things of the process for you as an author is to make sure that you comprehensively address every single comment that's made. Because it makes the reviewers then think, okay, they took my comments seriously, and it's more likely for them then to say, okay, it's improved, maybe it requires a little more improvement, or otherwise just accept it. Okay, and so the initial decisions can be accept off the bat. It hasn't happened in my experience, not for myself, my own publication, or I got real close one time. There was just very minor comments. Often you'll get minor revisions if it's a good paper, because there's always something that somebody says you could improve this or that. Major revision is more often the case. And it's always, what is minor, what's major? I prefer we could just call it revision, but we have to make a decision. But major revision is where you actually have to do some significant work to improve the paper and then resubmit it for further evaluation. Then quite a few are reject and resubmit. That's where somebody perhaps there's deficiencies in the paper that I pick up as the editor, and I send them right back because I don't want to waste associate editors and reviewers' times. And I get the authors to improve the paper so that I can send it out for review. Regrettably, most of those never come back. I think most authors who get that feel, I don't want to waste any more time with this, which is unfortunate. Now, we do get some of them back, and then they get published. So if you get a reject and resubmit, please don't think it's an outright reject. I'm inviting a resubmission. And then some, and I've got about 50% there at the moment, papers I get, I just reject them out of hand because they just do not match. They're really poorly put together, and I'll talk a little bit more about that just now. Rapid turnaround is critical for research findings to be most impactful. I do my best. I really encourage my associate editors and reviewers to do their best to provide timely feedback. But it's also incumbent upon the researchers or the authors, when they get review comments, is to turn that around quickly, because if it sits, it might be a year or two before it eventually gets accepted. And that doesn't help the authors, nor does it help the journals. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about some of the financial structure. So as I pointed out when I did my AGM, it's based on subscription and page charges, Taylor and Francis profit share, and then costs are print, post, and packaging. Some production costs associated with things not related to those other three issues. And then we do not get royalties based on the GSSA member journal subscription, because that's a subsidized, or it's a lower price than most other people would pay for it. And then, as I mentioned last time, it's been a 25% royalty up to this point. So traditionally, subscription and page charges has contributed to about 40% of the total income from the journal, but that dropped by 61% this last year due to the change from these royalties being based on subscription charges, which are in decline, rather than read and publish, and I'm going to focus on that a little bit just now. And so Taylor and Francis profit did increase, as I pointed out. So cost reductions, we have some ways of being able to reduce costs. And I just want to ask here, and we will do this more formally, if we were to go to an online-only publication for members, that would actually help us reduce costs of printing quite substantially. How many of you are still in need of hard copy of the journal for your purposes as members of the society? Anna? What's happening? I've got something else on the... Is that you? Yeah, I mean, with it, so one thing that will happen is that NISC will continue to do some hard copy publications, because they said there are some of the libraries that buy the journal, particularly in developing countries, they want the hard copies in their libraries. But increasingly, institutions, they only buy online stuff. But that's kind of a different issue. So yes, people can still get a hard copy if they absolutely need to. I was just trying to get a sense that if the society was to decide, if council was to decide that going only online, it would help us save in terms of printing costs and production costs. And I don't know how many people that would affect negatively. We want to make sure it doesn't. I didn't see any hands going up saying that they need a hard copy. So, that's something I think we should seriously consider. Oh, cool. As long as she is, then we all are. Thank you. And then offshore publication is also something that's being considered with some of the other NISC journals. They're giving it a trial run. There are some issues, however, if we do that, because if we send it to India for processing, they will not give the same kind of editorial feedback as we are all used to. NISC is really, really good at that. They've got some fantastic proof production editors, and they're really good at providing fantastic feedback. And so, as an editor, I would like to retain that to make sure that we have the highest quality type of publication we can get. So it's something which we're exploring though too. And then you look at me again. It's rebelling now. Oh, there we go. Nope, sorry. Let me just go back. Can you go back? Yeah. And NISC has agreed to an increase in the royalty rate from 25 to 33%. It's not a huge amount of money for us, but it is nevertheless an increase. Also, in conjunction with that, some of our journal administration things will actually go to NISC. The initial handling of the journals or submissions will go to NISC, and they will keep track of where we are. And they're not charging us anything extra for that. So for me, when I discussed it with council, it was a win-win situation because they would give us more money and they would do some of the work that we're having to handle ourselves at the moment. All right, so the new read and publish financial model, Taylor & Francis has signed a 3-year contract for read and publish deal with SANLIC. And SANLIC consists of 37 institutions throughout Southern Africa, mainly in South Africa. It represents them. And, sometimes I worry a little bit about these publishing houses that they try and obfuscate things so that we're not quite sure how income is generated, so that we just say, oh, it's okay, as far as the royalties go. It's not quite clear, but NISC is actually quite open about it. They say they don't really know how it's going to affect the income flow, and they're concerned about that as well. But a lot of universities are going to, or a lot of publishers are going to this now. So what does it mean? Well, read and publish is literally what it says. The amount that gets paid to the journal is based on the number of times that articles are read and the number of publications that are in the journal. And so we're not a big journal, but at the same time, there is a real great advantage for us going to this as for individuals. It ensures that researchers from participating institutions have traditional subscription access to all of Taylor & Francis content and may be able to publish their articles open access for free. Now, if you noticed in my presentation, the open access articles are often very highly cited. So this is actually very beneficial for us individually, but also for the journal. And so what NISC has told us that they think that the cap of funds that they have to cover this will be enough for all of our manuscripts to be published open access for free, which is really fantastic for researchers. We don't have to look for money for page charges and all that kind of stuff anymore. And they're open access, so anybody can access them. It's not just people who subscribe to the journal. It's not been confirmed yet, but that's what they're suggesting. However, what is important, this only applies to the lead author from SANLIC affiliated organizations. So the point here is if you want to benefit from this, you need to be strategic. You need to make sure that the lead author on your manuscript, on your publication is in fact affiliated with one of these organizations. I know it's important for us all to be lead authors, and hopefully your organizations are affiliated, and many of our organizations are, but if they're not, think about how you might be able to exploit this by having somebody else be the lead author. And then, you can also benefit from this. I'm going to skip this. Sorry, I actually meant to delete this because there's some ambiguity. So how to increase the benefit for the Grassland Society and its members? Read and publish. All right, so I don't know how many of you, when you get to the journal, that you go from the front to the end and read every article. Well, do it, because the number of times you download, the number of times you read it, that actually increases the number for us. And so I think there's a way that we can really elevate the metrics for these payments. Again, I'm not 100% sure how that's going to work. Same thing on the publish side. And I just want to focus on that for a minute because, for those of us who are in competitive institutions, sometimes lesser journals are not valued as highly as, publishing in Nature and Science. I say Nature because Nature is actually highly political. And whether you get published in there or not, it depends on how sexy the work is that you're publishing. And I have some colleagues who actually went back and criticized a publication that was in there, and Nature said, no, we're not going to entertain your criticism. And it was very legitimate criticism. And so that, it's, of course, it's great to get published in Nature. I'm actually very proud to say that we've just had a manuscript accepted in PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And it's interesting to me, sometimes you think, oh, this is going to be really difficult, or it's never going to happen. And so I have Rangeland Ecology and Management Journal article that's also just been accepted, been working on it for nearly 18 months to get it through the process. PNAS, 4 months we were done. And so, so the reason I bring this up is certainly we're not a PNAS, we're not Nature, we're not Science. However, the status of the journal increases the more that people publish really good stuff in it. So sometimes for leading researchers, I would really encourage you all to think, and I'm not saying you're not, but to think as of the African Journal, not as a journal of last resort, but as a journal of first resort, because then if really good manuscripts get published in it, then the journal citations will go up, and that will help our organization as well, and it'll help the income that we generate from it. I still remember one of the professors when I was at Utah State, Neil West, his most highly cited paper, he was a really good ecologist, was published in Journal of Range Management, as it was at the time, which was not considered to be a particularly high-tier journal. But it was his most highly cited paper, and he published in a number of different really high-tier journals. So just because you're publishing in a lower-tier journal, it doesn't mean to say that you're not going to get cited. There is a higher probability you may not get cited quite as much, but over time, as people pick up on it, then that's less likely. So please do consider the African Journal as a journal of first resort, not last resort. All right. Okay, so for authors, now some of you have done this many, many times. Yeah, I know, it's old hat. But anyway, for those of you maybe who are getting in the game or have had some frustrations, just some indicators of how you can be successful in getting manuscripts accepted in an efficient manner in the journal. First of all, really refer to the aims and scope. Make sure that your work relates to it. If you have any questions, send me a note and ask me, and I'll tell you how you can frame it in a way that it will be. Professional English language. That's often a problem that we have, not only on this continent, trust me, in the United States, in Texas. Some people, I wonder what language they're speaking. All right. So English, writing in professional English is actually, it's a real skill. But one of the things, so there's a couple of ways of doing it, is get a native English speaker involved in the journal if you're not don't feel proficient enough. Or one thing that we've just learned about, and it's coming up, so I'll probably repeat it, but the NISC has got a very, very generous endowment from one of the previous people involved, where they are willing, before a manuscript is actually submitted for review, to submit it to an editor to help it bring it up to the standard of English that is required in order to get it reviewed and published in the journal. That'll be really fantastic, because often that's not easy to get, and it would be a free service as long as they consider it to be a worthy manuscript. So let me just be clear, though. We would never send a manuscript that's junk to NISC to help them make it publishable. That's not the point. It's to get the language to a standard where it really is compelling. Okay, then as far as the introduction, clear statement of purpose, that's often missing, or research question, or a hypothesis. It's fundamentally important to know what the paper is going to be about. Usually I try and put that at the bottom of the introduction, just before the method section. In terms of methodology, sometimes people just refer to another paper. It's not good enough. You've got to tell the reader what you did in sufficient detail that they can go out and actually do the research themselves. And so that's often where we have some deficiencies in papers. Statistical methods. Employ a statistician if you're not comfortable enough. Get somebody to be on the paper who is a statistician. There's a guy sitting at the back there who's probably one of the best statisticians that I know. Just send him all your stuff and he'll help you figure it out. Yeah, the one turning his head. You know who I'm talking about. So statistics is really important, because otherwise your results are not defensible if you're using the inappropriate statistical methods. Results, logical, clear, and concise. Sometimes people ramble on, and it's not well organized, and they repeat themselves, and they go here and there, and that really makes it difficult to give the manuscript a green light. And then the discussion. That's one of the biggest challenges I have with my grad students or early career researchers, is they essentially want to repeat the results. You've already given the results, you don't have to repeat them. So the most important thing to address in the discussion is, so what? I had a postdoc, and he used to have this question, if he found a statistical significance, he would say, is this anything? Okay, and sometimes, we get statistical significance and it doesn't really mean very much in practical terms. On the other hand, sometimes we get small things that are statistically significant, like I published my very first paper, and I thought a 2% difference in crude protein was nothing. And one of the reviewers came back, he said, this is actually the threshold number you're talking about here. And so, but we need to be able to say, well, why is this important? Why is it useful? Why should this be published? Why is it novel? Why is it valuable? That's really important. And then reference other works as well to make sure, that you're comparing, contrasting, say what's new about your findings. And then as far as the review said, as I said, it can be really frustrating, but if you address those review comments comprehensively and take it as a positive aspect of your publication process and not a nuisance aspect, it's going to help you improve the paper, and it'll help me as an editor to be able to get it approved more quickly and get it into publication. So those are just some pointers. So free open access publication via the Sandlick agreement. Implications for primary authorship, already mentioned that, and also timing. So they did say that they think they've got enough money to cover all of our submissions that are submitted for us by a Sandlick affiliated author, or an author who's with an institution that's affiliated with Sandlick. So maybe timing isn't that important, but they did say that if they're limited on funds, it'll be the first ones in the year that are accepted that will be covered. So there's some strategic consideration there, is to try and get manuscripts accepted early in the year to make sure that you get this coverage. There's also some talk about elimination of page charges for those people who are in fact not affiliated with any Sandlick institutions. Page charges used to be the way that journals made money. That's not the way that journals make money anymore. It's through these, like Taylor and Francis, these publishing houses, who then pass resources back to the organizations who are associated with the journals. But we make some money on page charges, but there's a consideration to drop them, because the problem with page charges is it creates a barrier for some authors. And we absolutely don't want to create any barriers. So it's still something which we need to consider more clearly, but I personally am leaning towards trying to get that approved so that anybody who has good work can submit it to the journal for publication. And then I mentioned the pre-review editing support for African authors may be possible. It's not a confirmed thing, but we were told it fairly clearly at a meeting Susie and I had with NIST quite recently. And then the last thing is also brought up is maybe only online member access for the African Journal for the members of the society. We'll probably put out a survey about that, or ask people to let us know if there's any major resistance. We may not go that route, but otherwise I think it makes a lot of sense. I certainly know that any hard copy issues that I get, they just sit on my shelf. They just take up space. I never look at them, because we do all our research online these days. When we do searches, we don't go and look through journals anymore. Not like the good old days where we go to the library and spend half the day in the library trying to find articles that were meaningful. Yeah, that's history. All right, the importance of editor and reviewer roles. So I'm putting this up. No, all three jumped up. Okay. I'm putting this up because it's one of the bigger challenges that many journals are having these days, is finding people who are willing to review manuscripts. And I know why. I mean, I'm in one of those institutions where I get evaluated. Number one, how much money did you bring in? Number two, how much money did you bring in? Number three, how much money did you bring in? Number four, oh, you were cited. Good. How many times were you cited? Oh, and you teach. Nice. That's the sort of thing. So that's a problem, because most of our lives have become so busy and we get so little credit for these volunteer activities like reviewing manuscripts that it really becomes a challenge. And I think one time we had a manuscript where we asked 30 reviewers before we got 2. And it's a real issue. So the reason I bring this up is for all of you who are members of the society, if you get an invitation to review a paper, please consider it seriously, because it's really a challenge for us to have to reach out to many people in the process of trying to get a manuscript review. And always remember that for every paper that you send out, we need to find 2 or 3 reviewers. So theoretically, you should be reviewing 2 to 3 papers for every one that you submit. Devin, you had a question. We're recording it, so that's why.
Well, I just submitted something recently, and I don't think the submission requests reviewers. You get to say who you don't want to review, but I think as an editor myself, as an AE myself, it is so helpful to get good, thoughtful suggestions from authors on reviewers that can really speed that thing up. So that's another thing to take your invitation seriously, but also take prompts when you submit seriously. That can make things a lot better.
Thanks for that comment, Devin. I actually made that inquiry early on last year, and Taylor and Francis has a policy that they will not allow that. And the reason is because there's been a lot of strategic behavior in a recommendation of reviewers by people who review their buddies, who then approve their manuscript, and then they review in turn and approve a manuscript directly.
What about a subtle note in the cover letter then?
Yeah. And we do sometimes, when we really get to a point of frustration, we actually do contact the authors and say, are there folks who you can recommend? But I mean, I agree that if we could ask for 5 reviewers and then use one of them as a start, that would be very helpful. And I will try and follow up on that again. And then also timeliness of feedback. Sometimes, 3 months, 4 or 5 months, I'm still asking reviews for feedback. So if you're going to do it, please try and do it as quickly as you can. Timeliness is always critical. Okay, that's kind of the overview I wanted to present. I'm sorry, I've gone longer than I expected to. But I'd like to just open it for discussion now. And we are, just any suggestions and comments, ideas, we are recording this. So if you would please speak into the mic so we can capture everything and so we can move forward from that.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether I'm too paranoid or what, but with the NISC issue where you say that at the moment we are getting 25% royalties, and if they take up some of that admin work that we do, they are going to give us it's going to increase to 33%.
Correct.
To me, I don't know, it just doesn't add up, because then we are supposed to, it's more like they're doing more work for us than they were doing at the moment, but yet they are paying us more for doing that. And
your response is exactly what mine was. I thought
there must be a catch.
There's a catch. No, I think what it is that NISC has employees that are not fully occupied. And so they're paying their salaries anyway, and they see this as a way of helping us without incurring additional costs to them, because they already have people in place who can do that work. So that's why they're not charging us for it. And the way that I negotiated the increase in the royalty percentage was, I told them, I said, I know for the Society for Range Management in the States, who publishes Rangeland Ecology and Management, I was the chair of the finance committee, and I've understood very quickly how much the journal was generating, and that journal is published through Elsevier. So I kind of threw that suggestion out there as a consideration, and that's when they responded quite quickly to say, no, we would be willing to discuss this 33% instead of 25%, because I pointed out we do most of the work. Yeah, they do the publishing, but and they do the marketing, and we must not underestimate the value of that. But we do most of the work for producing the material to have a publication in the first place. But I think they were thinking that we might be considering going to another publisher, which we could. But if we do that, there's a lot of ramifications. So they responded much more quickly than I thought they would.
Okay. No, now on a different one, I'm taking advantage of the fact that I still have the mic. As a student, I used to, when I want to submit a manuscript, write a letter accompanying it, just explaining that I'm a student, so that at least you don't become too hard on me. Maybe I'm trying to check if that works with you, where someone explains themselves, so that at least you consider that as you read their manuscript and review it.
No, we have extra hoops for students. No, I'm kidding. I think a cover letter is always good, no matter whether you're a student or not, just to explain why you're submitting the journal. And you can do that through, many people do not, but I always do. I always submit a cover letter and say, this is why it fits in. And I even try and say it ties to this aspect of the literature in your journal, so they can see that, I'm familiar with the material. Saying you're a student, certainly it would be beneficial for us to consider that. And the thing is, though, it's not up to me as the editor. It's really up to the reviewers, and that information's all available to the reviewers as well. And if I'm seeing that it's a student, who's trying to publish their PhD work, it's still going to be good work, but I will inform the reviewers what it is, and so that they can take that into consideration. But yeah, putting a cover letter in 100%.
Oh,
sorry.
There's question about SANLink. As departments, we've also got to publish, and all the SANLink affiliated are mainly universities. So departmentally, our limitation is we've always had to publish with a university because of lack of budget for page requirements. So now we're going to be facing the same situation, is that we have no SANLink registration and we're not affiliated. How do we overcome this?
So if we were to drop page charges, that would probably help considerably, because then you can publish, it wouldn't be open access. You probably still need to pay for open access, but you could at least get it published without cost for page charges. And that's one reason I'm really keen to try and push the no page charge thing through. The other thing is just to be strategic and find, if you can, and I guess you also evaluated whether you're a lead author or not. And so, yeah, there's no way of getting around that. I think ARC is a member of SANLink as well. I don't know, to be honest, I don't know which all organizations are. I know there's 34 in South Africa, I think. It's 1 in Botswana and 2 in Namibia. So there's a lot of organizations aside from the academic ones that seem to be affiliated, but I don't know the list. I can certainly find out. But again, to answer your question more directly, I really think we need to drop the page charges so that that is no longer a stumbling block. The only thing is, it wouldn't be open access. Does that help?
Okay, some online comments. Sigrun says that online would be fine. Hard copies for me are for sentimental reasons only, but it is not essential. Then Craig says, I agree that we should seriously consider dropping printed copies. Then Debbie asks, I see that Microsoft has signed an AI deal with Taylor and Francis to use the data in their journals. What risk or benefit does this present for authors and the journal?
Yeah, that whole AI thing is something that I'm very nervous about. I know there's some good reasons to use AI for certain things, but we've already received manuscripts that have clearly been AI generated. They're often quite easy to pick up because they're pretty superficial. Often the citations and their references, they don't line up. And in terms of the discussion, there's no depth. So then at the moment they're fairly easy to pick up. In terms of, no, I don't know, was she asking in terms of AI data analysis or AI data generation? Data generation, yeah. I think it's a real challenge, and I don't know. It's always the same thing, right? When there's a new challenge, somebody's going to come up with a solution. There'll probably be some sort of software that you can use to filter it to find out whether the data are if they're too consistent, that might throw up a red flag, or if there's, I don't know what the filters would be, but that there would be certain filters. But honestly, I don't know. I'm pretty nervous about the whole AI thing because I think there's some real pitfalls, and so we'll have to figure that out as we go. David, do you have any ideas on AI stuff, on AI generated data? No. Okay.
Just maybe two questions, and they might be just like semantic questions, if I could call them that. The first one, when you ask to be a reviewer, you do get a set of guidelines for a reviewer, but to what depth should you review a manuscript? Should you, go page 1, line 1, there's a spelling mistake, or should you just, say, there's spelling errors in the manuscript? So, to what depth should you go into reviewing a paper? Firstly, and then secondly, when you talked about, speaking to the scope of the journal, etc. And you said that the scope is publishing novel research. Do we still, as in the past, allow for submissions like what was published in the proceedings of the Congress, where a keynote speaker here it's not research results, but almost like I don't want to say a review or opinion paper or something that everybody knows, but it's there was a nice keynote speaker and it was a nice keynote address. Can that still be published as a manuscript? Thanks.
So, I mean, every situation varies. I think one has to look at it. So if it's sort of a commentary thing, it could probably be published as a letter. We don't have commentary manuscripts per se, but I mean, that's something we could probably consider as well. If it's not, if there's no data in it, or if it's metadata, that's fine. But if there's no sort of analytical aspect to it, then we can't really accept it as a research paper. But there may be other ways that we can publish it. Yeah, I mean, there's some really good ideas that are put out, that get lost because they don't fit the box. And I try and find ways to do that. We haven't really had it. As far as reviewer, it's a very individual thing, I think. I'm one of those guys. When I get a paper, I always think twice whether I'm going to accept it or not, because I probably spend 2 days on a paper when I review it, full days. And I read the thing from top to bottom, and I do quite a bit of editing if it's a good paper. If it's junk, then I just say this has got to be properly edited before I'll look at it again. And so I think if it's just really poorly written, then the authors need to address that issue before I will review it. And then so for me, the most important thing as a reviewer and also as an editor is to see that the reviewer comments are constructive. To give guidance and say, well, you could improve this and this and this. We had one, it was actually pretty gross. There was a personal attack on us because they didn't agree with our ideas. And I hate to say it, but had to do with rotational grazing. Yeah. So anyway, so I think being constructive, just giving guidance. And then also if you get one, from clearly a young researcher, providing that guidance is really, really beneficial for those folks. More experienced people, they should know better. And so if you find that more experienced researchers are sending you things that don't meet the bar, then you just send them back and say, you got to do it again. I don't know who's next.
Thank you, I was just wondering if you are interested, like me, in becoming an associate editor. Of course, this is not going to be your main focus. You have your other work as well. So can you maybe give me a budget on how much time it's going to take of me to be an associate editor? Or is that also going to differ from person to person, but just plus minus?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And how many hours are you still sleeping? I try to be really circumspect in how many manuscripts I will send to an individual person a year, and I try and restrict it to no more than 2 to 3. But it depends on who is willing to handle it as an associate editor. Some people are just fantastic, and I've always got to watch myself. Say, oh, I know that this guy can really do it, and they'll do a good job, and keep sending them stuff because I don't want to overburden them. The associate editor's job isn't, in my opinion, particularly onerous, because you have to read the paper and then you have to, first of all, make a determination. Is it worth sending out? Because sometimes I will send a paper to an associate editor and say, just give me your initial feedback, whether you think this is worth reviewing, if I'm not sure of the subject matter. And then, sometimes they'll just send me a comment back and say, no, it should be sent back, or reject and resubmit. Or then they say, no, it's got good content, we're going to send it out for review. So an initial reading, and it depends on what the paper is, but take a couple 3 hours, I don't know. And then afterwards, what the rest of the work is really, when you get comments back from the reviewers, is make sure that they've done a proper job of reviewing the paper. And then some associate editors are really good; they'll review it themselves. So they'll basically handle it as a third reviewer, and I really appreciate that. But I understand sometimes people can't do that. Some associate editors basically said, well, the 2 reviewers said major revision, so I said major revision without giving any further feedback. That's not so helpful. So it's going to depend on you, how much time you put into it. But as I say, from my side, I try and really not overload people, because I don't want people to get fed up with a workload and tell me go and look for someone else. I don't know if that helps you enough. I can't give you a specific number because it does depend a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Mine looks like already I can sense that the direction regarding the page fees is towards scraping them, charges towards scraping them. But I'm curious about, first, how much was it, and how much of that ends up in contributing towards the society's income, so that we can also analyze the consequences of that decision.
Yeah, it's great. As the incoming president, you need to know that information. No, that's a great question. And it's ambiguous, because they put subscription and page charges together. And I think we could probably break that out. And I have asked Lester at NISC to give us a more accurate breakdown. So and they want to know as well, because it doesn't only affect us, it affects them too. So he is actually putting some information together for us to try and get a better handle on that. So I can't give you an answer at the moment, but we're trying to get that information. Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify Debbie's comment. So Taylor and Francis struck a deal with Microsoft to use or they haven't clarified if it's their books or journal articles, to use for their advanced knowledge training models. So without the author's permission. So
I guess I don't understand what that would implies.
So it's basically selling articles to Microsoft without authors having an option of opting in or not. So Taylor and Francis makes money off selling articles, basically, to train Microsoft's models.
Oh, for AI purposes.
Yes, and it's just been a bit of a contentious subject in the media.
So when you publish in any journal, you give up the copyright. So the manuscript actually doesn't belong to you. So if Taylor and Francis is making money out of that, theoretically, that money part of it should be coming back to us, because that's just more revenue generation for the organization. I would think that there will be a fairly severe backlash if they try and make money off the back of authors without actually sharing that revenue with the journals in which they're publishing. I'm sure there's a lot of journals who would really kick back against that. But I can't give you any specifics. I'm glad you brought it to my attention. I'll try and get some more information about it.
Okay, there's a few online questions. So Sife asks, with regards to the new genre of the data notes, can you publish that together with a paper where you've used that data?
Well, if it's exactly the same data, then probably not. But if the manuscript uses some of the data for the research manuscript uses some of the data, but you've got a bigger data set that you want to put out in the public domain, then I would think that yes, you could probably then have both the data note and the manuscript, but you couldn't double dip.
Okay, and then Craig is asking, in the review process, who is finally responsible for carefully checking all the citations and references and their formats? Can we leave it up to you?
Actually, the formatting is eventually left up to the journal producer. I don't do the checking on the formatting. As far as whether the manuscripts have all been properly cited, the associate editor should really have a look at that. But again, what the publishers will do, they go through every citation with every reference and vice versa. And if there's any disconnect, then they will inform us. Like we've just got page proofs now, and there's some disconnect between the citations and the references, and so they pick that up. I as an editor, I don't do that. Yeah.
Again, Debbie asks, does the journal use software to check for AI-generated manuscripts, or does this responsibility lie with the reviewer? There is software one could use, and perhaps the journal should invest in this.
So at the moment, the answer is we don't use it. If this is going to be switching over as a responsibility to NISC, I think that's a question I'm going to put to NISC to have them do an AI generation check before they actually send us the manuscript. Because if the reviewers are able to do it, it's fantastic. And we did have one reviewer who actually did that for us. She picked up on it. She says, I'm pretty sure this is AI generated. At the moment, we don't have anything in place, though, to do that. But I think one of the advantages of also working more closely with NISC in terms of the manuscript processing is that they can actually do that filtering for us. Those are great questions.
One thing I hear from folks a lot about is, how attendance here and getting your getting travel and registration covered by employers is predicated on giving a presentation, whether it's a poster or whatever. And it's great that the society is getting poster people up to maybe speak for 5 minutes or whatever to kind of boost that profile a bit. I know that some societies will publish proceedings still, even so they'll have even just an electronic supplementary appendix to a forthcoming issue where they have abstracts from the conference or something. And I'm just thinking that if funders and employers are going to increasingly want to see an impact for attendance, if there's if just a suggestion, or maybe others have other ideas about having our abstracts, live on after the presentation, after the conference is over, or maybe even something like an IRC style mini submission, where they're up to 2 pages and they include some figures and all that, and putting that in as a electronic only, online only supplemental information, so that it just kind of lives there and somebody can point to it and say yeah, this is the impact I've had, and somebody can go and find this information after I've gotten back to the office.
Yeah. I don't think we publish our abstracts here. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure we don't, but I'm not certain. As far as the proceedings, I think there's a risk that if you publish in the proceedings that you actually can't publish that elsewhere afterwards because of copyright infringements. And so actually, like IRC, which does publish proceedings with 2 to 3 page papers, I think that will probably be a potential conflict.
I think that's a valid concern, and I know of societies who have gone the other way and that they stopped doing that because where they had students that were giving a presentation and they would have those in, and that was all great, but then they'd run into barriers when they went to go publish their thesis and distinguishing the difference. But those are pretty elaborate. That's a full introduction methods. I think that there's got to be somewhere where it's, even if it is just the abstract or a little more a glorified extended abstract, that shouldn't compete with. But yeah, that is a valid concern. Yeah.
No, I mean it's certainly something worth considering by council. I don't think it's a journal issue though, because that's something that council has to decide whether it's worth publishing the abstracts at a minimum for as a service to its members.
Okay. I didn't know that we also had letters to the editor. I'm curious about how is that getting processed? Does it get peer reviewed? If not, how do you decide which ones to publish and which ones not to? Well, please send one in. It'll be the first one I have to handle. Letters to the editor generally do not get peer reviewed. It's a commentary for somebody who wants to comment on some aspect that isn't a paper. As far as I know, I've never done that. I would have to inquire, but I don't think letters are generally peer reviewed, because a letter is a letter. I mean, it's an opinion, and then it's up to the editor to decide whether it's worth publishing or not. So please send me one. I'll figure it out.
And then Craig says the abstracts could be made available on the GSSA webpage.
I think it's great. And also, I mean, somebody asked me today about presentations. I think the presentations as well could be potentially made available. But again, that's not a journal issue. That's really a Grassland Society Council consideration.
And then Debbie comments on that. This could still pose a problem, especially for students submitting a master's or PhD, because the plagiarism check finds articles on websites and then it is not novel.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're just over an hour. Yep. If there's any more comments, questions, I'm certainly willing to carry it on, but I also don't want it to go too long because I think a lot of people are thinking about that gin and tonic or whiskey or something.
Is the issue of preprints. How does this journal handle preprints or people submitting papers to a preprint website before it gets published? Have we had any cases of that?
I'm not aware of any. I mean, what happens with accepted papers, they go online pretty quickly. So when you say a preprint, how would people do that? I mean, it's got to go through the publisher, right? Because otherwise it's copyright.
I'm not sure, I haven't done it, but you often get people who submit a paper to a preprint server before it gets published. And that was particularly prevalent during the COVID pandemic, when people who were doing research on COVID would submit papers to a preprint server. And then it gets circulated, everybody uses the data and the information, and then if the paper gets rejected, it's still out there. But I think the journal should have a policy on how we deal with that, whether people are either encouraged or discouraged to do that, or how we handle it if someone has submitted a publication to a preprint server before submitting to the journal.
So, I mean, again, it's not something I've had to deal with, but I guess the first question is how would we be able to identify that? How do we track that? And certainly, if I was aware that a manuscript had been published anywhere else before, it was submitted for publication, I just reject it. I don't think we can accommodate publishing something that is already available somewhere else. But is it a policy? No. As far as I know, but I will check with the incoming president.
In his review, and was it on Wednesday that Wayne was writing, he also mentioned fruitful avenues for future research, including, I think, how to increase capacity for among communal farmers. So will you guys perhaps put a call for publications with regards to that?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood your question. Can you just repeat it? Sorry, what?
In the review of Wayne that he presented yesterday, he also, in one of his last slides, he recommended some fruitful avenues for future research, where he had several points, and one of them was how to increase capacity for communal farmers, especially with the advent of climate change and other threats.
Yeah, so I mean, it's something I'll have to discuss with him. I'm not sure exactly what he had in mind. I think maybe one of the things he was referring to was special issues, where you can cover certain topics to give that more exposure. But I mean, in terms of just having information about communal farmers, it's got to be presented as a manuscript for us to consider it in publication. So I'll get back with him on that, because I'm not entirely sure, what he was thinking about that. I've been just speaking about a special issue for 2026. And, we're thinking of maybe focusing on grazing management, both in a commercial and communal context. And Wayne would be a perfect guy to be a guest editor for that. Don't tell him I said that, though, because I haven't actually asked him yet. Is he online? Okay, Wayne, you are so invited.
You owe me a beer, Urs.
Probably laughing his ass off. Dang. I say too much. Yeah, please ask him to comment. Let him tell me yes.
You owe me a beer, Urs.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Thanks. I've just gone onto Taylor and Francis's website, and they've got a definition. Preprint servers are online repositories which enable you to post this early version of your paper online. And in some academic disciplines, preprint servers are not commonly used, and it gives a list of what they are. And it says later on, if you upload an early version of your article to a non-commercial preprint server, you can subsequently submit to a Taylor and Francis journal. We do not consider posting on a preprint server to be a duplicate publication, and this will not jeopardize consideration for publication. So I think it's something that we just need to think about and have some kind of a policy on it, because I think what the dangers are, someone submits a really poor paper to a preprint server and it's there, and then they submit to our journal or something that gets rejected, or it gets accepted with a whole lot of changes, but that preprint version is still in circulation.
Yeah, but I don't think Taylor and Francis could force any of its journals to accept a manuscript that has been put on some preprint service without a proper review. I mean, it's not a peer-reviewed journal.
No, it's not. It's not peer-reviewed. And I'm also not sure how you would know if something's been submitted to a preprint server or is on a preprint server before the time. So it's just worth thinking about.
Yeah, no, it is worth thinking about. But I mean, whatever's submitted still has to meet the bar of a proper manuscript that is going to be peer-reviewed, whether it's been pre-printed or not.
So Wayne says you owe him a beer, but on a serious note, he would be happy to.
Well, that was the most amazing invitation I've ever offered in public, online. And a beer is the cheapest price I've ever had to pay. Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate that.
And it wasn't AI generated.
All right. Well, folks, I just want to thank you all again for spending the extra time here going through this. I think there's some really interesting discussion. I'm glad it's all been captured and recorded, because my memory is reasonable, but it's not great. So I'll go through it and I'll make sure that I follow up on the things that I wasn't able to address. But again, I just want to encourage everybody who's here, think of our journal as a primary outlet for your work. And I know we cannot put everything in the same journal. Employers don't like it, and we have to diversify. But if you've got some really great work that you think, yeah, I could put it in rangeland ecology and management, I'm just going to say, don't do it. They're one of our main competitors, and frankly, they're not that great. No, I mean, it's a good journal, but there are some editorial issues that I have with that particular one, and Devin is nodding at the back. But I'm not just wanting to pick on one journal. Do think of our journal though as, being a good outlet, because I'd really love to get this over the 2.0 mark for the 1 year impact factor, and not just for me. It certainly do my ego a lot of good, but it's for the society. Great. Thanks for being here.